Right, you may have noticed a bit of a slowdown in video production as I sort of carry on trying to climb the mountain that is Rook endgames in the Dvoretsky endgame manual. A few reasons for that. One of them is I'm actually back to work, which means I have to spend my time doing work rather than producing chess videos. Another reason is that I'm finding the material a bit harder, so it's just going to take me longer to go through it before I'm sort of confident enough to produce a video, summarising all the useful things that I think I've got out of it and hopefully can pass on to others as well. And also, I've been playing a bit of chess myself and taking a break from chess to play chess. So yeah, I played in the Birmingham Chess Congress last weekend. I did all right. I got lucky in round one, had a bit of a disaster in round five, but played some pretty high-rated players as well, and I got 1.5 out of 2 against a couple of people who were 2,300 plus. So that aspect I was pretty pleased with. And the half point came in a game where I ended up having slightly ballsed up an endgame that was obviously drawn. I messed it up and then had to go into a Rook and Bishop versus Rook endgame where I hadn't yet been forced to the edge of the board, so it was drawn the position I'd got, and I knew that, and I also half knew the procedure for not getting forced to the edge of the board, but it is tough. And I messed it up. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stop him getting me to the edge of the board. So we had a position pretty similar to this where he got me to the edge of the board. But then he failed to convert it. And we were both down to time trouble. But we're talking about a very strong player. He was 2330 rated. And because I knew how to win this as white, I think I knew it reasonably well. I certainly knew all the main ideas, which I'm about to show in this video. I also knew how black could be very stubborn in their defence, because I've practiced this position in the past against Stockfish as white and got nowhere with it, and it's like, oh, what are you meant to do now? And I'm going to be doing that again in this video, so I'm hoping that's actually going to be okay. And this time I'm just going to beat Stockfish in this position. But anyway, yeah, I think at the time I would have had a pretty good idea of the sorts of things you need to do to win this position. My opponent didn't, and I managed to get him to about 50 moves. Well, he got to about move 43 and just gave up because he thought he wasn't going to be able to do it in the next 7 moves, and he was down to like increment. Anyway, so that was a good hold, Rook and Bishop versus Rook. So in short, it was drawn. I messed it up and got into the lost version where my king's on the edge of the board, but still managed to hold the lost version. And the whole thing just made me think, well, hang on a minute. You're messing up the bit that's drawn. Your opponent's messing up the bit that's won. This is a good excuse given that the Rook endgame mountain is pretty tough anyway, just to sort of have a little bit of a break and cover Rook and Bishop versus Rook, which is, well, first of all, we'll do 94 in the Book of Jesus, which is where the king's on the edge of the board, and it is 1. So how do we win this? It's pretty bad. This is called the Philidor position, by the way. And I know there's a Philidor procedure when in Rook and Pawn versus Rook, but this is also the Philidor position. I guess Philidor didn't just do one thing when he helped the world with chess. We've got the bishop sort of stopping the black king getting out. We've got the king stopping the black king getting out. That black king is in a bit of a mess, and we've basically got to, as this rook switches sides, as this rook sort of switches sides, threatening checkmates, we've got to make sure that we're covering whichever the relevant file is. And that's basically how I drew last weekend. I just did that. He messed about a bit and tried to maneuver the king and the bishop. We sort of shuffled along a bit. We probably shuffled into the drawn position at one point without me sort of fully realising it. Just out of interest, we're on the central file here with the bishop. If you put this position on the bishop's file, it's still a win for white. If you put it on the rook's file, it's still a win for white. If you put it on the knight's file, it's a draw. And some guy called Lolly came up with the, why that's a draw. I think in this video I'm going to sort of go through that, and then I'm going to have a go at it against Stockfish. I'm almost certain I will not be able to do it. It's very, very hard, but it is theoretically a draw. Anyway, how do we actually win this? Like I say, with the black king pretty caged in to the edge of the board. Well, let's just give a check first of all, and get the black rook back, and then we'll bring our rook to the 7th rank. Okay. Now, if the black rook doesn't stay on this file, so if we see something like, I don't know, rook h8, then the white rook just swings across here. All black's got is this check, and that's it. Okay, so rook h8 is obviously a ridiculous move. Okay, we can't move the rook. Black could try and get their king out. So this is the thing about the Philidor position, is that when I first learnt it in the textbook, but then I went to try it against Stockfish, and Stockfish does all these sort of moves that the textbook, I mean, they are given as side variations in the textbook. So, you're not meant to do that. You're meant to politely do this next move. So this might be a sort of example. So king c8, here we can play rook a7, and then you've rook d8 check, king shuffles across to c6, that black king has to come across to b8, then we check on b7, the king has to go to a8 because of bishop e6 check. Well, that's winning the rook, isn't it, straight away, of king c8. So the king has to go to a8. But now we've got the bishop lined up against the black king, which is a very useful asset, and we just shuffle the rook back to b5. Black can't do a check there with the rook because, well, there's only one sensible check. Rook c8 and king d7 check will win the black rook. So black has to move the king, and there's only one square. King c7 is tempting here, attacking the black rook and lining up a checkmate on a5, but the problem is black plays king a6. I mean, it's still won, but it's not the quickest way to victory here. The quickest way to victory is you play rook a5 check, that forces the king back to b8, then bring your king in, and yeah, I mean, black's just got nothing against, well, we might see, king c8, and then we can go bishop c6, just stopping the king getting out this way. Or if we might see rook d6 check, and then bishop c6. So it's just gone. So in that, we've come back to the 7th rank. Rook off to h8 doesn't cut it. King c8 doesn't cut it. The only thing that black can really do is bring their rook back down on this e file and be ready to guard against a checkmate like we've just seen, and also be ready to switch across and guard and checkmate there. If the bishop ever moves to try and help in white doing the checkmate, black's going to be checking the white king from behind. The best square to do that, where you're sort of guaranteed to get that check, is d2, because it's a black square. And that's why black will bring their rook down to the 2nd rank. So I knew that, and I did a lot of that in that game I managed to draw last weekend. I also knew that the 2nd and the 1st rank were where my rook belonged. I didn't want my rook being forced to the 3rd rank. So we'll come back to the 2nd rank. What's so bad about the 3rd rank? Because in a minute, white's going to make some manoeuvres that force the black rook back up to the 3rd rank. Let's have a look at what's so bad about it. And it's the fact that this square here is a white square and can be sort of covered quite nicely. So as soon as the rook hits the 3rd rank, this is when you give a check. Okay. If the king goes that way, it's over. That's just a very easy win. Okay, so I think Jesus de la Villa calls it a time-gaining check, because you're sort of forcing the black king into a position it doesn't want to be in. So we'll have the king going the other way, king to e8. Then you play rook a7 anyway. I mean, what does black do here? They've got to try and run away. They've got to try and get to the g7 square. But then you come back, rook f7 check, forcing the king back to e8, because obviously king g8 is a disaster. You'll just lose the rook to a discovered check straight away. So king back to e8. And then you come down to the 4th rank, rook f4. By the way, I had a bit of this going on in my game last weekend, a check, and I had to go one way because a discovered check the other way was a disaster. My opponent never found this 4th rank idea, even when I'd stupidly let my rook get to the 3rd rank somehow. I'm not quite sure how. And now, so now the thing that's being threatened is bishop c6 check, followed by rook f8, which will be a checkmate because our bishop is covering the e8 square. The block's not there. So that's being threatened. black's got two ways to try and get out of it. One of them is king d8, okay, and the other one is rook d3. They're the two ways we can stop white's plan of bishop c6 and then rook f8. Well, it's not immediately checkmate, you have to take a rook, but it's going to be checkmate in about 3 moves. So if rook d3, just pinning the bishop, then you just play rook g4, and we're threatening it again, and there's absolutely nothing that black can do about that. And if king back to d8, here's sort of the crucial point of this entire winning procedure. This is why you needed the black rook on the 3rd rank. You play bishop e4. That's why you brought your rook down to the 4th rank, because now you're threatening rook f8 checkmate. There's nowhere to hide this way because the b7 square isn't available. If we hide this way, we'll see bishop c6 check, followed by rook f8 check, and then checkmate, taking the rook. And black is powerless here. This is over because your bishop is guarding this check. Okay, so back in this position, black doesn't want his rook on the 3rd rank. The best rank is the 2nd rank. But now all you do is you just play a waiting move. Okay, to say you're not having the 2nd rank, you're going to have to choose one of the others. And black will be like, all right, I'll choose the 1st rank because I'm not coming to the 3rd rank because of what we've just seen. Now I think by symmetry, if our rook was on f7, I think bishop f3 would be all right straight away. But I think that's right. I think it's just I think there is a symmetry thing. Although I'm about to go over to the other side, there might be something to do with it being the short side. I don't know. But we're going to bring our rook over to the other side, rook to b7, so that when the black rook comes and challenges or gets ready to block that checkmate, then we can play bishop b3, guarding the d1 square. And this is the point where the black rook is going to be forced to the 3rd rank. But after this rook b7 move, so we play rook over to b7, what if black doesn't play bull? Again, you know, this is the tricky stuff that the engine might try and do. So king c8, and then we bring our rook over to a7, and now black's only got one sensible move here, really, which is to, the engine's second best move there was just to sacrifice the rook. So rook b1, getting ready to block the checkmate. But now you swing your rook over to the other side. Black's only got one sensible move, which is to, well, there's another sensible move. You could play rook b6 check, and then bishop c6 block. It's not a particularly sensible move, I suppose. But the only other sensible move is to run away with the king. But the reason we did that messing around there was we wanted to force the rook onto the b file, so it's now lost. So a little reminder of that. Rook over to b7. If the black king comes over to c8, if we do king c8, rook over to a7 to force rook b1 and then switch over to the other side so that you win the black rook. So king c8, not such a great move there. And instead, black just simply blocks with the rook. And then we come down and guard the d1 square. Now what if black tries to run away with the king? And what we're trying to do here, by the way, is force the black rook back up to the 3rd rank. We know that's good for us. But what if black says no and runs away with the king? Okay. Then we just bring our rook down to the 4th rank anyway. I mean, black's got to play king d8 there. It's the only move that stops the sort of the threatened. Again, the threatened checkmate is check followed by rook b8 check, because the bishop on e6 guards the c8 square. So black's got to do something about that, king d8. Then you bring your rook over to the other side, rook h4. So black's got to block that. Okay, but then you play bishop a4. How about that for a move? So you're still guarding the d1 square, but you're also now guarding the e8 square, ready for that rook h8 checkmate. King tries to run away, and then you bring your rook back to b4, and black's powerless against bishop d7 check, followed by rook b8. Similar sort of idea to the bishop e6 check, followed by rook b8. Sorry, black also had in this position. Yeah, what if they now try and run away with the king, king c8? Then you can bring your bishop back to d5, because if the king tries to run away, you've got rook a4. Everyone clear? I mean, there's a lot of variations in it, and it's sort of impossible, I think, to memorize all of them. But you just need to be aware of all the various things that might happen. And the other thing is for the attacking side, ignoring threefold repetition, you've got a lot of goes at it. You know, I mean, my opponent had 43 moves and couldn't find any of this stuff. He didn't even try and mess around with the bishop to sort of block my rook taking particular squares, which is, well, at least I knew that's what you were meant to try and do, and I knew you had to get the rook to the third rank. So, you know, if I'd been the attacker, I did know about this idea. Although, of course, I would never claim to I'd memorised all those other variations that I just showed you a second ago. So bishop b3, and finally we force the rook to the third rank. Okay. And now we need to do something useful so that the rook has to stay on the third rank, so we threaten a checkmate. Bishop e6 threatens the checkmate because we're guarding the c8 square. And yeah, I mean, black has only one sensible move here, which is to check from behind, and then we come back. Okay. And black doesn't have time to return to the first or the second ranks because checkmate on b8 is being threatened. So black really just has to block that. In fact, you could go king c8, rook a7, I think would yeah, that looks fairly damning for black, doesn't it? So rook c3, much more sensible move. And remember, right at the start, if the rook had come down to e3, then we chuck in this check. As soon as the rook sort of, and we're in the sort of the Philidor position, but with the rook on the third rank, that's when we chuck in this check. Rook d7, king c8, rook off to g7 onto that side, and this is the bit where, yeah, so the king will try and run away to a7, but now you come back and check. That forces king c8, and now you come down to the fourth rank. Okay, again, you're threatening this check, followed by this checkmate but one. So black can only think really to... Well, there's a couple of things they could do here, but they're both useless. They could just pin the bishop so that you can't play bishop e6 check, but then you shuffle the rook off to a4. Okay. Or they could put the king back on d8, and this is the bit where you're guarding that fourth rank. And it is over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and play this position now against Stockfish and see if I can win it. Right, here goes then. And we'll just sort of follow the textbook until Stockfish does something different from the textbook. I mean, that move was forced. So up to the 7th rank. Okay, and they've done the textbook. They've come down to the 2nd rank, and this is where we just play a waiting move, rook g7 or rook h7. And they've gone to the 1st rank. They're really doing the textbook. So now we come over to b7, and they'll block there. What is it we do next? Oh, that's right, we cover the d1 square. And that's forced them to the 3rd rank. Brilliant. Oh, I think they're just going to do the textbook. How about this? They're not trying any of the king moves that we need to know what's going on. Rook back to c3. Now's when we chuck in the check, isn't it? As soon as, yeah, that's when we do the check. King to e8 is a load of rubbish, so I'll play king c8. Then we go over here and threaten checkmate on g8, so they'll go to b8. We come here, check, and then back to b4. And that's the pinning of the bishop. So now we go here, and it's done. Oh, well, that was all right, wasn't it? I feel like Stockfish made our lives quite easy there. Right. Okay, let's look at it again with the same position, but on the bishop's file. It's exactly the same procedure, which I will try again in a minute against Stockfish. But there's just something extra to be aware of, that a different defensive try that doesn't work on the central file, and doesn't work here either, but it sort of trivially doesn't work on the central file. Okay, so check there, rook e7. Something we didn't even look at, well, we did look at, we said it was just absurd, was rook h8. Okay, and the reason it's absurd on the central file is that we would now take the white rook off to whatever the letter of the alphabet before A is, 7. Okay, so if the king was one square further this way, rook A7. Okay, and we still play rook A7, but king B8 in the central file would have been useless because you just do check on whatever that letter of the alphabet is before A8 and pick up the rook. Okay, so on the bishop's file, at least it makes a bit more sense to try this rook H8 defense. Rook B7 check. King A8. I mean, king C8. You've got bishop D6 there, haven't you? So yeah, so king A8. Bishop D6 anyway. Rook down to H1. Rook to G7. Rook C1 check. Bishop C5. Rook B1 to check, to block the check, sorry, and then rook to G2. And the king being in the corner means it's just sort of over. When you have the Philidor position on the rook file, which we'll also look at in a sec, it sort of ends up in this, like you end up winning it by sort of almost bringing a king off the rook's file, and you end up in sort of similar positions to this. Right, let's give this a go against Stockfish then, see what it does here, because I'm pretty sure it's not going to do that. We'll play this against the computer. Let's go white. There it is. And let's see if it does something similar to the central files, or whether it might try some king moves this time. Rook D1. Oh, hang on, that's straight to the first rank, isn't it? So we don't need to play a waiting move. So we can just come straight to A7. Block. Take the C1 square. There. Threaten a checkmate. Block. Then I go rook back to B3. Then is when we play this check. Over here. And that's it. A7, king B8. Took me a while to remember that. Down to the 4th rank. And now we're ready to guard the B4 square. He's blocked. He's pinned the bishop. What do we do here? Oh yes, just rook over here somewhere. And that looks like curtains to me. Hey, done. Nice. So we'll also just look at it on the rooks file. So this time we'll go off to the side with the rook. If black comes down, well, we'll call that the main line, rook b2. If black just starts a sort of a series of checks, rook a7 check, king b6, rook b7 check, king c6, then rook down to b1. This is pretty similar to what we're going to see. Bishop b6, rook c1 check, bishop c5. It's the thing I was talking about a minute ago. It almost does look like the one on the bishop's file where the black king's already gone into the corner. Rook b1, rook a3 check, king b8, and then we've got bishop d6 check, king c8, rook a8 check. That business again. So instead, let's look at rook down to b2. We kind of want our rook on the 6th rank, and that's going to be to stop checks on that rank by the defending rook. If rook to b3, let's cover that one first, just staying down this end of the board, but on that. I mean, the black rook's got to be ready to block checks on b8. Bishop b6, rook a3 check, king b5, king out to b7, rook h7 check, king c8, king into c6, rook c3 check, bishop c5, and we've arrived in the Philidor position on the bishop's file, which we win as shown expertly by me before. So not rook b3. What if black gets their rook back to b7? Still play bishop b6. Watch out for stalemate themes in this whole ending as well, by the way. I'll show you another one in a second, actually, that I was a victim of as I tried to practice this against Stockfish one time. So bishop b6, rook a7 check, king b5. That was a stalemate trick, obviously, the rook a7 check. Rook to f7, but then we bring down to king to c6. This is why we wanted our rook on this 6th rank, because it's taken away any checks that black might have. They've got to do something about the checkmate threat there. Rook f8, but now we just imprison the black king. Yeah, with bishop c7. Rook g8, bishop to d6. Rook e8. I mean, if this check is tried, then we can go king b6, rook d8. And now this is a really nice move, this one. We just play a waiting move. Okay, we want to move our rook down to anywhere, really, to threaten this checkmate over here, but we're defending our bishop, so we can't. But black has no king moves, and they can't play the rook this way because of this checkmate. So you just play any old waiting move, and it's gone. The black rook has to go somewhere on the 8th rank, and then you bring your rook down onto this rank. So instead, maybe rook e8, but then you bring your rook down on this rank anyway. And it's over, because the black king has no squares. So yeah, I guess for completeness, we ought to play that one against the computer as well. Let's try that one. Oh, and then I'm going to still show that other stalemate trick that I said I was going to show. So let's be white. Right. So yeah, rook off to the side, rook h3, and then we're going to go rook up to the 6th rank. Okay, so that's rook there. Now we're going to see some checks. Was that in what I just showed? Can't remember. I think it was, actually. Brilliant. Hoorah! And now we have Philidor defense on the bishop's file. So the rook's already on the 1st rank, so rook over to a7. I think I've shown this already. Let's see if Stockfish does something different this time. That's a block, of course. Yep, then we take away the c1 square. Rook to b3, threaten the checkmate. Rook c3 check, come back to c5. Cool, it took ages there. It took ages. Now it goes rook back to b3. Oh. That's a load of rubbish, isn't it? Should we give it another go? Come on, you go rook b3 here. Right, well. Stockfish has gone mad. Rook b3 was a much better defense, and that's where you start your rook c7 check, king to b8. Your rook goes over this side. We'll see a check, come back down to the 4th rank. It was getting you back to the 4th rank to get your bishop back there to guard the c3 square. We've shown it already, I suppose. I'm just going to go back to there's just one little stalemate trap that you might see. I'm just going to go back and show you how that might arise if you get your move orders a bit mixed up. Yeah, just something to be aware of here is rook off to the side, rook back here. Just check out this. Rook h8 check, rook b8, and then you come back to the 6th rank. And this is not what we said you should do. Rook g8. And you think, oh well, I've got him now. I'll make sure the king's got no squares, and he can't check me on the 6th rank because I'm covering that with my rook, and everything's sorted. So this is now a draw. Oops. So just watch out for that one. Right, finally we've got the Philidor position on the knight's file. And this is just a draw, frustratingly. So you can try and win it against the computer, but you won't be able to. I'm going to try and draw it against the computer, and won't be able to. We'll see it in a sec. It's very, very hard. I'm sure I'll mess it up, but Yeah, so rook d8 check, rook c8. Let's see black's resolve here. Rook down to c1, and we'll sort of just do all the normal stuff. Black just hovers on these first and second ranks. He forced the black rook back. This was a game, by the way, that happened. I think. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure what those moves were. Rook back to c1, fine. Bishop a4, and black just doesn't really care. They just keep their rook on that c file. Check. Obviously, the c file's blocked there. Bishop back to b5, rook back to c3, bishop back to c6, bit of messing around, and then finally the white king comes this way and tries to make progress. I mean, the white king's going to d6. Black can't stop the white king going to d6, but the black king's still sort of ready to run away on a7. Bishop d5, rook f1, king d6, and if rook b7 check, that looks quite nasty because you can't play king a8, king c8, rook back to e7, king back to b8, king b6, rook back to c1, bishop e6. This looks pretty bad, doesn't it, guarding the c8 square? Then you start the checks. Bishop to d5, rook h6 check. There's a thing about how you have to be ready to deliver checks on this rank if you're sort of being forced out of all the other defensive procedures. So not rook b7 check, but we might see king d6. There it is, rook f6 check, bishop e6. So that, I guess it was in this position, bishop d5, you had to be ready to deliver checks on that that rank, sorry. That's what the textbook says. I've got to confess, I mean, this is probably already coming across as not in the slightest bit convincing, and there's a reason for that. It's not convincing, I've got to confess that. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll now play this against an engine. This is now a draw because the king's off the back rank, but even this, I'd fancy the engine to beat me from here, but we'll see how long I last. I mean, I'll have a go at it, and I'll go through my thinking, and then we'll sort of maybe just call the video there. But I've shown how to win it: central file, bishop's file, or rook's file, and I will produce another video on how not to get pushed back onto the first rank in the edge of the board in the first place. So let's set up that position. Right, so the board's reversed, and Stockfish has shoved in this check first of all. So I'm going to get to move one, all right, with this blocking of the check. Rook back there. I think the second rank's the place. Let's do that. That's the best place. Rook over there. All right, first rank. This is where I'll start doing stuff with his bishop in a minute. There we go. Right, that's forced me to the third rank, I think. I don't really want to go back here because that's already guarding this checking square here. So I think that's right. Rook c3. Hang on, didn't it just come from there? It just came from there, didn't it? There you go, that's 2 moves. Got to move 6. Only another 44 to go. Right, that's a nothing move, so I also need to play a nothing move. First rank's better than the third. Here we go. One of the things it says in the Book of Jesus is that it's easy to defend this because all of black's moves are forced. And this position's no exception to that. I cannot see any other move than that check there. Oh, this is good. Just got another 2 free moves out of Stockfish. Oh, nice. Am I getting somewhere? No. Well, you're getting up to move 11. Right. Well, that's surely all right, isn't it? Whilst the bishop's on c6, let's go on a checking party. Do I want to check there? Doesn't look good if I don't. We're going to see rook check, bishop d5. Then what? I've sort of got Philidor position on the central file, but my king's hopefully sneaking out over there. So, a waiting move. Should I go waiting move? Waiting move looks sensible. There we go, check. That's forced, obviously. Uh-oh. Oh dear. That looks forced to me. Right, now what? See, how does this happen? Like, I now can't do this because I lose my rook. It's just so annoying. Playing engines. I think I've just lost. I've just lost. I'm sure I've just lost. How did that happen? I can't see a move here. Rook b6, check bishop c6. King b8. I think this is lost. There you go. So I got to move. It's going to be about move 19. I've lost my rook. And then I'll resign. Oh, I can't see anything else. Can anybody see anything else? So I like the way in the Book of Jesus says, oh yeah, it's easy to defend because all black's moves are forced. I don't know what I did wrong there, but that looks lost to me. How do engines make it seem so effortless? All right, let's... Should we give up the rook? Haven't got any sneaky stalemate tricks. What should we go? Rook b6. No, let's just lose the rook. Lose the rook and resign. There you go. So I lasted 20 moves. 19 moves without pawn advance or capture. Okay, so I'll resign that. I think it might be useful just to, last thing, just go and look at how I managed to balls that up. It's obviously very, very hard. Well, I think it is very, very hard. I mean, I know some of you, people might be watching this video going, well, it's not that hard, John, you're just crap. Fine. All of these moves are good. Everything I was doing here. I mean, I even lost with all these sort of freebies. Oh, here we go. Somewhere around there. Okay, so that was a losing move. And I should have just held the rook on this file. There you go. So this, I mean, like I say, it's this in the Book of Jesus. Black's defense is easy because all their moves are forced. We get to this bit where my move wasn't forced, and I should have held my rook on the b file. That was a losing move. It's now checkmate in 29. Right. So the main point of this video was to show how it's one rook and bishop versus rook. If the king is on the edge of the board, I demonstrated it quite nicely on the, I think, on the central files, the bishop's files and the rook's files, and went for all the variations as well. Stockfish didn't try all those king move variations, like all those king c8 moves at various times, but you know, see, it's worth going through them all to make sure you sort of see all the main ideas. It's a draw on the knight's file, but I've just demonstrated, I think, that if you are the attacking side, just keep going, because you've just seen Stockfish smash me up very comfortably as I just played one bad move. So it's very, very hard to draw it, and it needs practice. I mean, I guess if I was to perfect that, I would have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing that one on the knight's file. Anyway, I think that's enough on rook and bishop versus rook. I'm going to do one more bishop. I'm going to do one more video on how to not let you get your king forced to the side of the board. That's also very hard, but I'm still going to say something on it, and hopefully I'm going to do my best to actually do it against Stockfish as well. Because remember, my game last weekend was where I had a drawn version of Rook and Bishop versus Rook, messed it up, allowed my king to the side of the board, but then my opponent couldn't finish me off, and I basically 50 moved him, which I was very pleased with. Right, yeah, that's enough.